Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, preseason rankings, misguided, ill-informed, useless, and absurd, unless Texas Tech is involved. So today, we discuss a valued, timeless, purposeful, and useful part of the preseason buildup, a top 25 coaches poll. Today on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for making us your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, helping you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege today. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions apply. He's the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and great to be back with you once again. And Chris, we will be, I see you got your floaty and your towel. We will be diving back into the realignment pond coming up in just a moment. We'll get to some reporting yesterday on what we discussed as far as further exploration of expansion for the Big 12 Conference, and also possibly some reporting that squashes that, at least in one context we saw yesterday. We'll get to that coming up. And one of the more intriguing aspects of this realignment, what does it mean for the future of the college football postseason, whether it's the playoff and automatic bids or bowl tie-ins for a conference that could no longer exist? What does it mean for the others? We'll get to all of that and more coming up in just a bit. But first, if you will indulge us on this Texas Tech show, would love to pause, Chris, for a Red Raider football mention as we are into the first true week of fall camp, and we're starting to see some preseason rankings rolled out. Of course, you want to make sure you get rankings out before any pads are ever put on or anything is done to actually tell you anything about a team. You definitely want to go ahead and rank those guys before anything like that happens. So we got an opportunity to do that here today. What a tradition, and one that I guess over the years has come to just totally fall off my radar, because it's been since 2008 since our guys, the good guys, have shown up on this list. But they're here again. The USA Today Coaches Poll, Chris, has been released. Top three look like this: Tom, Dick, Harry, 4, 5, 6, so-and-so, yada, yada. Who cares? But number 24, your Texas Tech Red Raiders, just ahead of some bum from the SEC at 25. I can't recall off the top of my head who that was. Big 12 representatives, Longhorns at 12, Horned Frogs at 16, K-State 17, Oklahoma 19. And let me just say it one more time. For the first time since 2008, the Red Raiders at number 24 in a preseason top 25. Chris, what do you make of it?
Well, I think the question that always comes up when you see a preseason poll is the following, because I think people view them differently. And the question is always this: is this what I view things are as they stand right now? Or is this the way I am predicting that they will look at the end of the year? Is this the preseason guess as to what this poll will be at the very end of the season? And the reason I say that is because, I just think people kind of vote it differently. They vote it based on how it finished up last year, or, hey, I'm going to vote it because I think these guys are going to be really good. And so they kind of project forward. It has nothing to do with like how I think this team is right now per se, or how they just finished. It's right. What I think they'll do this year. And like I got into a back and forth with somebody about because somebody I saw had an issue with, not an issue, but was going, man, I don't know if I grasp all the Tech love and everything. I mean, they just, maybe they're getting too much credit for beating a collapsing Oklahoma team and then, and beating up Ole Miss. And I thought, well, Oklahoma did collapse. They were 6-7 last year. Why in the world are they ranked? Let's see here, 19. Like, explain that to me. And I think there's some suggestion. Well, Oklahoma's got an easy schedule. So again, I think somebody kind of took this and viewed it as Oklahoma's got an easier run, so I'm going to vote them because their schedule's easy. So I just think it's hard to nail down people's thought process on this deal. Look, Georgia's a clear-cut number one. whether you're talking about last year, what you think will be the end result next year. I always view this as like how things are on this day. That's how I view it. And I think that's why it changes week to week, because you're taking a snapshot of what these programs are. So Georgia is a clear-cut number one. You knew Alabama and Michigan and the Ohio States are going to be right up there. But I'm like you. I was mostly focused on, the Big 12 schools and maybe like where is Oregon at on this deal. And I think, you see Oregon at 15. I also think that you see Utah at 14, which is I hope people are paying attention to that, because Utah, man, and Kyle Whittingham, that deal is rolling right now. So be aware of the Utes. I thought TCU was really high, okay, on this deal. They lost a ton off of last year's team. You lose a Heisman Trophy finalist. You lose a first round wideout. You lose, I think you lose like 3 or 4 of your top defenders, your best offensive linemen, on and on and on it went. Your stud running back, and they did hit the portal hard. They got a bunch of Bama kids that they added, but I thought they were ranked very high. But I could keep going, Cowan, but I thought it was a fair shake for Texas Tech. And again, I understand they have to prove it now. They haven't done anything, but they've earned the right to be here based on the way that they finished up last season, and also based on who they beat last season, and then all the guys that are on their team that come back from last season. That gives you a lot of street cred, if you will.
Sure. Is this the only coaches poll that any coach actually votes in, or do they even bother with this one? Because when we get into season, it is Sports Information Director media poll.
That's not the end-all be-all, but I do think there's some meaning there. But sometimes you look at it and go, what are we doing? This is and sometimes it's all just there's brands that are getting way more benefit of the doubt than they deserve.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, contractually, the Longhorns obviously have to be involved. I was laughing when you were talking about sometimes this is a projection of what it might look like at the end of the season. Well, the ones that are voting the Aggies into the top 25, they're not going that route, because obviously that's not going to be the case. But I think I saw what you were referencing on Twitter, and someone talking about the Tech love. I'm not quite grasping it yet. All they did was beat Oklahoma and Ole Miss, and these are reasons why those wins sucked. And then you look at the preseason top 25, both aforementioned teams ahead of you on a preseason top 25 list. So I don't know, maybe just poor examples or a poor argument chosen in that case. But you're going to have some preseason shine on you. And, yeah, if you're able to get a win in week 1, you're going to show up very likely with a top 20 type of matchup, assuming Oregon does the same here in Lubbock in week number 2. So could be really, really exciting. And you just love to not come in at number 25, because you just kind of feel like an afterthought. If you're 25, they're just thinking like, oh, what other bum can we throw in here? So 24, a nice, solid spot to start. Okay. We'll kind of circle back to a similar conversation, because you're talking about how a preseason ranking could set you up for the way that your season could progress. College Football Playoff Committee rankings, of course, going to be a part of that at some point in time. And all of that gets wrapped up in the burrito we know as the college football postseason, which is in a state of flux. We will get back to this coming up later on in the episode, fluidity when it comes to college football playoff automatic bids. And of course, now bowl tie-ins up for grabs. And this could be coming down the pipe, of course, sooner rather than later. Want to get to that up ahead and some of the latest on the Big 12's exploration of further expansion or not, next on Locked On Texas Tech. First, today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And in this day and age, every new hire can feel like a huge gamble. And when we're talking about your business or livelihood, that's not ideal. But LinkedIn Jobs is here to help by helping you find the best qualified candidates available fast and for free, all on one easy to use and secure platform. Simple but specific targeting tools allow you to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to consider. They go beyond just resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates faster than anyone else. So go to linkedinjobs.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedinjobs.com/lockedoncollege today to identify the most qualified candidates and connect with them fast and for free. Just like a bad hire could sink your ship, the right hire could take your business to new heights this year. And it's no coincidence that small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. It's so easy. Even a podcast host could do it. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today with LinkedIn Jobs. Terms and conditions apply. Glad to have you along for the ride on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Coming to you from west of the 100th Meridian, where it's really been going down and will continue to with Chris. I'm Casey. Do subscribe on YouTube or wherever you got this podcast so you never miss an episode. Chris, you and I talked on yesterday's episode about whether or not the dust would truly be settled for the Big 12 Conference. Are we going to see some more expansion in the near term? Certainly keeping an eye on the long term as far as things that could be shaken out there on the East Coast with the ACC. But after you and I finished our conversation, as the day rolled on, you did start to see some reporting as far as further conversation or consideration is concerned. And there was some attention paid at one point in time to San Diego State and Oregon State as a reported conversation. And I can't remember the source, but I then saw Brett McMurphy of the Action Network saying that the Big 12, quote, has no appetite to add any of the Pac-4 schools or San Diego State. According to McMurphy's tweet and his source, he says, quote, we have no interest in doing anything. We are done, end quote, which, of course, I would not take to the bank. Now, maybe as it relates to Pac-4 or San Diego State right now, but how do you define done? What do you mean by done? I think that's open to interpretation, Chris, but I was actually, this scratched me where I itched, because when I'm seeing some of that yesterday, I wasn't too thrilled about picking over the carcass of the Pac-12 or about San Diego State. I'm back in the situation I think we've been in, sort of, when it comes to UConn or Gonzaga or San Diego State. Turn over every Power 5 rock before you go down those roads, in my opinion, unless we've got some broken off basketball rights conversation to really have, which we could. It's possible. We may see that in the future. But I think as it related to the Four Corner schools and now has come to pass, I would consider some of the same things probably about possibly the future dissolution of the ACC, in saying I'm waiting as a conference to exhaust every Power 5 option before I'm going down some of these other so-called group of 5 or maybe sport exclusive additions. And maybe that's where they're sitting. That's my take. How did you interpret some of what you saw yesterday? And I think, can I say we're still on the same page as far as exhausting those Power 5 options? What do you think?
Yeah, I think at this point, the only, like, this is me personally, the only schools I would be like, I don't even know if the right word is excited, that would make sense to me for you to add without knowing all the context, just at face value, would be some of the ACC schools. I just don't, the 4 that were left over from the Pac-12, I just don't think they bring anything to the table. And if they did, you would have already added them, and the TV networks would have said, scoop them up. They're there to be had. They bring more value to you. We can pay you more. They don't.
Yeah.
And I don't, and then you get into the conversation with yourself about, okay, is everybody trying to get as many kind of like, asset collection, so you have more weight you can throw around just because but at some point it becomes bloated. Like the trying to schedule, trying to manage the whole thing. And I think you're already kind of seeing the fact that the ACC is talking about adding those Bay Area schools is just wild to me. Yes, it's an academic fit if they want to still play that card, but that makes even less sense from a travel standpoint than the Oregon or Washington did for the Big Ten. And I don't think Stanford and Cal really bring you value from a viewership standpoint and all those things. But it's so because here's what do I believe, or what page am I on? What do I think will happen? Believe nothing and believe everything. That's kind of the thing with this, because there's still more moves to be made.
Yes.
Now, how relevant will the Big 12 be in some of this movement? I think that's the question that ultimately we're trying to figure out. And I'm not ready to just put it to bed yet that you're just – because I saw, the report that you referenced, and it said, hey, we're done. We have no appetite for that. I don't know if you are done. I think that, things change. Things could get altered. One move could lead to another, so because – you're done maybe right now, but the ACC starts busting loose, and like you're telling me you're done then? You don't have any appetite for any of those schools, on the East Coast? I would strongly disagree with that sentiment. So, but I don't know if I really believe that the ACC is gonna falter. I just can't imagine that ESPN's got Florida State under lock and key for a sweet price. It's like, you know what? Break up the whole thing. Screw up our deal that we've got. We've got these people locked up for a decade plus. Screw up our deal, and then so we can pay everybody more. I don't buy it. And I don't think the SEC wants to grow past 16 either at face value. I really don't. I think they're very happy with their number. They don't need to grow. And so I don't know if the Big 12 wants to either.
Yeah, you may think you're stuffed when you leave the table at Thanksgiving. If you're the Big 12 now, you're already on the couch. You got the fly-in button. You may be dozing off even. But then the ACC comes out of the kitchen and says, hey, we found this cobbler in the fridge. We forgot to even get out. Do you want a piece? Yeah, I think. Well, you going to bring it to me? You got ice cream? You throwing in the Hurricanes? And then maybe you find a little more room. You're not so stuffed as you possibly thought you were. I think that could take a little more time than we kind of been working with here, I guess, in the last few months to possibly play out. I don't see that as imminent or impending necessarily. But like you just said, believe everything, believe nothing. Yeah. I mean, it seems far-fetched for it to be imminent, but what's far-fetched in college football or in realignment? A California school being in the Atlantic Coast Conference, not so far-fetched anymore. I think it's now All Coast Conference. I thought I saw that noted yesterday. They've changed the name, but yeah, I question everything, hold fast to what is good. Locked on Texas Tech, just always taking it back to Scripture.
And we know that there's multiple meetings and conversations going on with. I think Pat Forty has a real good feel for the landscape. You can agree or disagree with what he writes, but he's been covering this stuff for a long time. And he was writing about the Bay Area schools over the weekend, and he was like, here's their 5 alternatives here now that the Pac-12 is done. Independence, is one, that would be a very difficult road to hoe. De-emphasize football. So basically just go, you know what, we're tapping out.
Suicide for the athletics department.
We're not going to spend money here. We're just going to kind of back off of this deal. The Mountain West, which Stanford will never do, and I don't think Cal will either. They're just not going to go that route. And West Coast Conference was an option. Again, you're kind of
Ice Cube, the commissioner.
Shout out. And then the ACC was the other. But what's different about the ACC is a possibility here is that with the Big Ten, it's like, okay, there's already USC and UCLA, and so you're not, every trip is not going. I'm like pointing over here, like I'm looking at a map to on the West Coast. Not every trip would be to the East Coast per se, and then there's a lot of those schools that are in the Midwest. But when you're talking like the Bay Area schools to the ACC, every school is on the East Coast. Almost every one of them is pushing the as far as East Coast, and you only really have your other travel partner there. So no, that it's just whether it's those 2 or 4, I don't know. That seems good in theory, but I just don't. In reality, I just don't buy it. I don't think that is a realistic option, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But maybe they can meet about it and get the pro rata, shares and get it worked out and figure out a way to kind of. I don't know, come up with the alliance. Remember those words from a few years ago with these leagues, and maybe they're not official members. Maybe they're just like, we have an agreement, a scheduling agreement or something. I don't know.
Hilarious.
But there's not a lot of good options for some of those schools. But until those schools have a home, the Big 12 will get tossed into these conversations, Cowan. I mean,
True.
I think just at some level. So.
Yeah, but luckily the Big 12 has done enough now to have the luxury of standing pat if they so choose and waiting out possibly better options. So again, maybe not imminent or impending, but an eventuality that you will have more moves made at some point in the future. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you got this podcast, because you don't want to miss that episode when it's going down, possibly in 2031. We'll be right here. And if you're not ready, you could miss it. All right, coming up dead ahead, what I think is the next most intriguing conversation following the actual movement within realignment. Get back to what you mentioned just a moment ago. Theoretically, what could a college football playoff setup or bowl tie-in setup now look like? Auto bids, etc., on the line, and these are the pendulums of power, really, when it comes to these automatic qualifiers that I think could swing your fortune one way or another. Very, very important as far as those conversations go and the decisions ultimately that are made. We'll get into that coming up ahead, wrapping it up on Locked On Texas Tech. To be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network with Chris. I'm Casey, and continuing our conversation before we're done with a pit stop in the land of the college football postseason. Bowl tie-ins now changing, obviously, with the dissolution of a Power 5 conference, and wondering as well, Chris, what the future could hold when it comes to that college football playoff. And, there's a lot of things to consider about that, but specifically want to get into automatic bids. Now, we could see a bigger college football playoff. I don't know what changes are still to come. It seems like that remains in a state of fluidity. We hadn't even gotten into it yet, but, already reconsideration of should we do it this way? Should we do it that way in response to an evolving landscape, I guess we might say. One of the interesting things that you might have seen yesterday was from Heather Dinich, who had a report that included in part this, saying a consideration for the college football playoff in a revamped 12-team model in 2024 would be the 12 best teams, period, kind of like they do now with the top 4, but you would just go with the committee's top 12 ranking, which sounds like doing away with automatic bids. And I could only ponder, Chris, because there are things that are not so bad possibly about that, but also things that are potentially very dangerous for a league like the Big 12 or a program like Texas Tech about that. So how are you processing that possibility, and where do you think we do eventually land with this?
Yeah, I think the ranking the 12 best teams is not the best thing for the Big 12 conference. I think that is in so many ways, that is the language that the Big Ten and the SEC or vice versa would very much be in favor of. It would allow them to get the most teams involved, and it would potentially squeeze some leagues out or a group of 5 out. I think that you need to be rooting for 4 automatic bids the way that the thing was originally suggested, and maybe they just go from 6 automatic bids down to 5. You do the 4 leagues that are still in place, and then you do the best group of 5, and then you have an extra at-large bid. I think would be because this is all going to be. And the reason I say this is because you don't want to root for the 12 best teams, because I think you want access to this, but you also want part of the revenue if you're one of these leagues. And if you just say 12 best teams, that to me suggests, hey, you got to make it in, or we're not giving you a piece of the pie because I mean, the way it was currently constructed, this was like $80 million given to each league. I mean, substantial amount of money. And so even when you divide it up amongst league members, that's an extra $3 to $5 million a year. And that's how you're getting, because everybody's seen that the Big 12 is getting paid just under $32 million for their media rights. Well, when you factor in college football playoff, NCAA tournament money, your own conference championships, and whatever revenue that you were getting closer to 50. So I think that, you just want to be a part of the party. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And I think automatic bids secure that. I do think that there could be some roadblocks thrown up there on allowing that to happen. But I think that's what you ultimately need to root for. Just because what schools are going to say is man, their league isn't as good as ours. Just
right.
because they went undefeated or one loss in theirs, that doesn't equal us getting 3 losses in this one because this league is better. I mean, that's kind of the game.
Help me understand the difference here, Chris, between the auto or not auto, because I think you and I were kind of texting about this part of it yesterday. Right. I think the Big 12 champion is going to be in. Every time you're going to be in a top 12 scenario. And beyond that, I still, even in an auto bid scenario, expect, say, the Big 10 or the SEC to have more teams than you in beyond your conference champion. Maybe you get 1 more in. Maybe in a good year, you've got 3 in. Meanwhile, I don't know, there might be 8 teams between the Big 10 and the SEC. And then, what's the ACC or a group of 5 conference doing? It gets pretty crowded pretty quick. But if I could just hypothetically think that the Big 12 champion is going to be in that top 12 typically or always, I guess I'm wondering, why is that different than an auto bid scenario where that Big 12 champion would always be in there? But then yet it's still left up, I guess, at that point to the committee to say, okay, how many more are we taking from that league? But maybe there's some skepticism on your part that I'm missing on the Big 12 champion being in all the time. What's the, I guess, between those two situations? What makes it so different?
Yeah, I think because you can have a weaker champ in some years than others. And what I mean by that is what happens, depending on how they do the schedule here, what happens if you kind of had an easier regular season and you're not as good on paper? Again, perception from the committee. What if you miss, like for example, Oklahoma this year? If Oklahoma makes it, there's going to be a few. Now they have the brand and all these things, but there's going to be a few people that go, well, they took advantage of an easy schedule. I don't think they're as good as some of these other teams, or even another team in the league that, that had to play a tougher schedule that maybe doesn't have quite as good of a record. And Oklahoma just happened to win the championship. I think there's different kinds of champions and different resumes and things like that.
Yeah. And I think really when you're talking about relevance within the sport, you want to think of a possible path to the playoff or path to a national championship, and putting that thought in as many fans or teams, coaches, players' minds as possible, I think is one good intention that I'd like to be a part of this. But at the same time, Chris, I don't know if you are to cut off, because people talk about, well, you got this 30-team league, it's going to be down to the Big 10 and SEC. If you get into that scenario, you are cutting off a third, half, maybe 2/3 of what right now is considered major college football, that being 60 to 65 roughly kind of Power 5 teams. And I just don't see that coming to fruition. I think that's far too many consumers that you're going to cut off. So I think there's still going to be some path that we can feel good about if you're not in that group, Big 10, SEC, whenever this dust does settle. But I don't know how many times I've used that term this week already. And every time I say it, I don't feel like I'm telling the truth. Nothing's settled. We're all in a state of fluidity, day-to-day contracts, right? And I'm going to go ahead and renew yours for tomorrow, Chris. I'd like to see you once again for another conversation here on Locked On Texas Tech, man. Thanks for the time as always, and we'll do it on the other side.
Absolutely. And at some point here, pretty quick, we'll start talking some Red Raider football as they are in the midst of camp. And, even got Joey McGuire kind of getting into urinal comparisons with his facility and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. But, at some point, we'll bring it back to the Red Raiders and all those things. But there's a lot going on, man. These are massive things. And but we'll keep talking about it as the topics come up. And I guess we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, let's all head off. Ready, break, 3, 2, 1, and check our hydration levels. Do you have a computer in your toilet? All right, report back tomorrow. We'll have some findings. For Chris, I'm Casey. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. We'll see you for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.